Right, so what you're seeing scroll past you is a little promotional video that the alt-Lite have concocted. You're seeing various members of the alt-Lite scroll past you. I think the only ones that are missing, Paul Joseph Watson, Casey Hopkins, Mike Cernovich. Just off the top of my head, those are the ones that I think are missing from this very almost definitive collection of what you'd term the alt-Lite. And we'll get into what the alt-Lite is. But this is a promotional video for a defence, a rally in favour of free speech, a very amorphous concept. And again, we'll explore what it means to defend free speech in a moment. But just note the tone of this promotional video. Note how it's scrolling past you. Note how they're protesting in a manner that is very similar to how their opponents would protest. The way they make such a small gesture like ripping off some tape seem momentous. Look, this is the extent of their activism, right? Don't expect them to be storming Parliament or burning down the institutions. They're just going to rip some tape off their mouths and call it a protest. Reason why we've started here at this point in the timeline is because there will be this protest, this defence of freedom of speech on Sunday. And the people involved, specifically the liberalists, who are sort of organised around Sargon, who's also present in that video, the reason why we've started here is because the liberalists are preparing for war. They are literally preparing for more than just ripping tape off their mouths. Now, I think it's well known that Godwinson's got a few little moles within the Liberalist UK Facebook page. And they often send me amazing posts, truly golden posts, concerning the activities of the liberalists. And, I could spend my every waking minute chronicling them and reading them aloud. But this one is gold. This one is absolute nectar of the purest form. And it concerns the upcoming events of Sunday. It's written by someone whose name I won't share with you, just under the interests of privacy. But I'm sure if his plans go even remotely well, that you'll see him across all of your front pages on Monday morning. It reads, "Last Monday, it was clear that it was the first demo / rally that a lot of you guys have attended." And what he's talking about here is the Sargon Free Dankula pathetic, march, quote unquote, through London, where they were brandishing their Kekistani flags and weren't really making much of an impact. And I think within these circles, I'm not really that invested in them myself, but I think in the liberalist circles, they saw the Free Dankula event as a sort of moderate failure. So he says, "Last Monday it was clear that it was the first demo / rally that a lot of you guys have attended. This is not a bad thing, but you guys were a bit naive, especially over the police filming you." This makes me laugh. This really makes me laugh. If you're allying yourself and aligning yourself to a YouTuber, specifically Sargon of the Cat, someone who's known for being pretty controversial in the media, in the mainstream media at least, for saying stuff like, I wouldn't even rape you to a female member of parliament, the whole white N-words thing, he's not necessarily got the greatest rep in the public eye. And so when you're aligning yourself to him, and you're aligning yourself to a public figure who is openly being targeted by, an organisation like Antifa, then you've got to realise that you are also putting yourself in the line of fire. It's sad but true. If you're going to a Tory conference, you're not going to be under the same amount of scrutiny from these fringe groups as you are bizarrely going to a liberalist one. You'll find the exact same opinions on both sides, I think. I'd be very surprised if there was a splinter hair of difference. But by categorising yourself as a sort of adjunct, as an addendum to Sargon of the Cat, then you are making yourself a target for these Antifa people. So it's very naive if you don't think that you're going to be filmed. It's very naive if you don't think you're going to be looked at as a suspect in any crimes that are committed at these rallies. You are on a watch list, right? Bizarrely, for espousing quote-unquote, very milquetoast and liberalist views, you're going to be on a watch list that puts you up there with the white nationalists that you are so adamant in calling deplorables. On Sunday, first point is, last Monday there was a lot, or even there was an Antifa spotter there, and a Hope Not Hate cameraman. Beyond that, there was no opposition. And I'd argue that there was no opposition because no one really cared about what Sargon was doing. This one that's coming up on Sunday, this rally coming up on Sunday, is going to be like a group of, of these alt-light figures who've actually got more of a presence, probably collectively, than Sargon, right? Molyneux, right? I do vividly recall Molyneux being on like a BBC Points of View program. He was the subject. Someone's mum was on there saying that their son had defooed, and really sort of cut his family off completely. And it was all under this Frey Domain radio. You're the solution. That sort of doctrine. And the way they were treating it was though they were talking about the Jonestown fellow or the Heaven's Gate people. Molyneux, I think optically in this country is seen as like a weird cult, especially in the public eye. So I think that you're going to see a group come out for a collective that's bigger than just Sargon ranting about feminists. This Sunday, Antifa will be there. Antifa are mobilising and will be there in numbers. Now this in itself is not a danger, but if they bring the ultras with them, I don't know what the ultras are, they could be trouble. There was a conference in Sevenoaks, which I think is in Kent, a couple of weeks ago. They travelled from central London to Sevenoaks for the express purpose to violently attack the attendees. They brought weapons. However, the security and the attendees beat them off before the police event intervened. I'd argue that they mustn't have been that much of a threat if, a couple of Redditors and, 2 bouncers on the door were enough to hold off this Antifa horde. I'm not trying to scare you off, but you need to be aware of the worst case scenario. We will have our own security operation going on as well as the police on the day, so hopefully there will be a clear gulf between us and them. However, if you do come across these people, you will know it. Avoid them. Do not attempt to engage them in conversation. Do not react provocatively in response to their taunts and threats. Seek other attendees of our demonstration and stay with them. Now, where have I heard this advice before? I'm pretty sure I've heard it in the run-up to the Charlottesville rally, the Charlottesville happenings. Pretty sure this was the same advice that's being now taken by liberalists across the UK. There is strength in numbers. If you are attacked or singled out by these people, you have a right to self-defence. While it's ambiguous in British law, if people swing at you, you are entitled to swing back and defend yourself. I can't wait for them to misunderstand sort of British common law. I can't wait for that to happen. I can't wait for a lot of Reddit autists being thrown in the gulag because they can't control their nerd rage. Really, I mean, there's no need for them to get into fights. Let's say Antifa water cannon them. I suppose they could just walk away or retreat into a nearby pub and just let it happen like that. But I'm certain, and this is where the funniness will happen, the ultimate laughter will be exhumed. This is going to be hilarious, watching, these Redditors, the odd Redditor, I should say. I wouldn't say most of them will be fighting and defending themselves. I don't hold them with that much valour. But I think that the odd one or two will get so worked up and so nerd-raged that they will spurge out, they will go crazy, and it'll all be on camera, it'll all be filmed. They'll probably get water cannoned by Antifa, but it'll be very funny watching someone in a Free Dankula t-shirt really going for broke. If this happens, the police / our security guys or the crowd will rapidly come to your aid. I don't think the crowd will come to your aid. I don't think the police will come to your aid as readily as you think. You're thinking that you're on the side of the establishment, and you're on the side of everything that's good and pure. But I mean, you're seen with equal contempt as the white nationalists are. You're seen as almost being in the same box, as in the same category. And when you've got Antifa or just other people that align themselves with Antifa, you know, your mild-mannered Momentum Labourites or Corbynites even, when you've got them shouting on a megaphone, calling you all fascists and calling you all Nazis, you're going to see the crowd look at you with disdain. And they're not going to come to your help if you're being pummeled by a Marxist. They'll just watch it. They'll watch it, probably laugh, probably call you a racist scumbag. That's what's going to happen. So don't think that you have the ear of the crowd. Don't think that you have the ear of the establishment and the ear of the consensus, because what you're doing is acting as gatekeepers for the real white nationalists. Basically, and this is fantastic, don't bring a cricket bat. Looking to cave in an Antifa's skull, if they try and twat you, you twat them back. Rip off their face cover. I mean, that's good advice. I mean, that's what you should go for with these Antifa sort of louts and loons. Just try and, you know, dox them on the spot. But it'll be very funny seeing this sick and weakly army of Redditors jumping on people's faces, trying to rip off their disguises. Notes on flags. We aren't, and I am not saying what you can and cannot bring, but it's highly advisable to not bring Kekistani flags. Now, this is a common thread in all of these little Sargon rallies that have been happening. They've been fetching Kekistani flags without any irony or self-awareness, waving it as though it's, you know, a real political symbol of their movement. First of all, I don't think any of them. I think it's been forgotten that it's based on the National Socialist flag. I think they've just completely forgotten that. And the ones that are familiar with its origin and are just, you know, have some self-awareness, have just kind of justified it in their own minds as being ironic. But to the man on the street, to the crowd, which they think are going to aid them in their pummeling by Antifa, that's akin to a Nazi symbol, and I don't think that's going to go down well. You know, however they may think it's a joke and an ironic thing, I don't think that's going to go well with the man on the street. And they recognise this. The Liberalists UK recognise this, and they say we're not discriminating. I have to compose myself for this one. We are not discriminating against autistic people, but you may think it's funny, cool, edgy, but to the rest of society, it's cringy. Plus the press will be there. The Kekistani flag is distinctive for obvious reasons. Just picture yourself bringing such a flag and the BBC or Sky corner you and demand you explain it. Now, this is what's going to happen. On Sunday, this will happen. You know, you'll have, if they even send out someone like Nick Robinson or Andrew Marr or your Andrew Neils, if they send any of those out, I mean, if I were out there, I'd be looking for the Kekistani flag, and I'm sure it won't be hard to find, because I'm sure there'll be a few out there waving them under Sargon's names. I'm sure there'll be around Sargon, so that'll be maximum exposure for him. But when they see that says it all. That's the one. That's how you make it seem more nationalist, more racist than it actually is supposed to be. But it's going to be very funny watching all of these alt-right characters who define themselves on, you know, not being racist, not being offensive, you know, really pushing the boundaries of their milquetoast opinions. It's going to be funny watching them being characterized and mocked and parodied under the label of uber white nationalist. It'd be very funny. You don't want to be the twat known for being an autiste on national TV trying to explain Kekistan or Nazi frogs. You are welcome to bring national flags, however. Make sure they are ironed. Nothing looks sloppy or worse than a flag with massive creases in it. I think they're trying to learn their lessons from previous attempts. I've made comments about how their rallying equipment hasn't been up to scratch. It's not been presentable. So I hope they're listening to me. From what they're doing here, they're listening to me, and I think they're listening to the sort of alt-right at Charlottesville. You know, they're very they're appropriating from every source. MAGA hats welcome. Do not cover your face. We aren't Antifa. We can/should be able to defend our views and right to protest on Sunday proudly without covering our faces like cowards. My advice would be cover your face. For heaven's sake. Don't make it known that your public allegiance is to Sargon of Akkad or Molyneux or Lawrence Southern or Milo Yiannopoulos. Good God. Look, if any of you are studying for a degree, and you actually want your degree, and you actually want to keep your degree when you've graduated, cover your face. Don't put yourself out there as a public figure, because, we live in a society now where they will strip away things for holding certain political opinions. And you may think you're in the right, and you may think you're not a Nazi, and you may think that all of this is perfectly fine and acceptable, but the mainstream media and Antifa and all of these groups that are going to be there against you will spin you as such, and you are going to be in the same box, as the white nationalists, as the proper, true nationalists of this country. So don't expose yourself, for heaven's sake. Cover your faces. Try and be as anonymous as possible. There's a reason Antifa do it, but don't try and delineate yourself from Antifa by not covering your faces, because you'll just lose your jobs and any career possibilities and job opportunities, and then you won't be able to fund Sargon's Patreon. Vice will almost certainly be there as well. If they try to interview you, I'd advise you decline. These people will take anything you say out of context, or twist it, or try to talk you into saying something inflammatory or stupid. This is wise. They're basically the liberalists are basically going for a no contact with the media policy, which is advisable. It's what should be the case. There have been problems on the alt-right side with speaking to the media and them twisting whatever they're going to say. So yeah, don't interact with the media. But in turn, don't put yourself on their cameras. Don't be unmasked. There is no after party. Once the rally ends, Tommy and the speakers will leave immediately on the advice of the police due to safety concerns. Yeah. And also because I'm sure that they won't be allowed into any sort of establishment in the nearby area. I don't think any central London pub is going to host, an army of Kakistani, Nazi, racist, UKIP voter, Tories, Sargonites. They're not going to host them, unfortunately, especially when they've been spun for the past few hours outside as being such. Anyone attending this event, because of how profile it's going to be, because of all the names that are going to be there, the quote-unquote names that will be present, anyone attending it and putting their face out there and being vocal is going to be really hindered in life, I think. I think this is a toxic thing. I mean, I think the liberalist event, the little beer hall putsch that I went to, was, in my opinion, as sensible as it should have. It should have all remained underground. They should have just been meeting in various beer halls, surrounding Sargon, taking pictures with him, chanting his name, trying to lift him up. It should have been little gatherings for people who feel lonely to come together and, have a drink on Sargon's dime, have a few canapes on Sargon's dime, maybe throw some pennies his way so he can make a living out of it. It's going too far, and it will ruin lives. It will end up doxing people. I think a few people will be expelled and suspended from university yesterday, or today even. I read something that a couple of Exeter students have been expelled, completely excluded from the university they were attending because they wrote something racist, something anti-Semitic in a WhatsApp message. This is the world we live in, and this is especially the education system of the UK. And if you want to keep your degree, I mean, sure, if you don't want your degree and you're fine with that, by all means, go ahead. But if you're trying to build a political career on the back of Sargon of Akkad, and you want to put that on your CV, if you want to put an event like this on your CV, you've got to be very careful in what you're doing. Because you're going to lose that which, some of you have been working for, for the past 3 years, some of you 4 years. Do you want to spend all that money, upwards of 40 grand? If we include loans and all of that stuff, it's probably more. Do you want to piss all that money away on a degree that the university won't even give you because you're an evil racist? You've got to be very careful. You've really got to be careful. You are welcome to arrange amongst yourselves drinks and meetups, and there will be meetups. Trust me, there will be. I've heard of. Again, my little sparrows have been telling me that there's a little clandestine meetup of liberalists that Sargon will be in attendance of. But just be aware of your surroundings and who is near you. Antifa London have such a reputation for trying to follow people and attack them in pubs, such as an event that happened after the Speakers of Corner event,
2 weeks ago. Travel in groups, enjoy yourself, social network, demonstrate and propagate the message and the cause we are rallying for. Note how in this little briefing, by the way, there's no sort of line on what the cause is. There's no... I mean, I've seen similar rallying manifestos to this, similar bulletins to this. I think the Charlottesville, it was all about promoting the idea of black crime being very high, being disproportionately high in the United States. That was the main message, and that was what was going forward, especially in the literature before the event. What's this saying here? There's nothing about freedom of speech. I know that's what the event's for, but there's nothing in this manifest about, okay guys, I mean, you need to mobilize because you're supposed to be talking about this one line, this one mantra, freedom of speech, repeat it, just hammer it home, freedom of speech. If you're going to talk to the media, just hammer that line, freedom of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. But that's not the case, because this is a cult of e-celebrity, except it's a toxic cult of e-celebrity, where they've been suckered into a lie where they're expected to, or they think that they have, that they've become quote unquote red pilled. They've absorbed all of these political ideas, that they are ready to take a stand and really die for what they believe in. But the problem is that it's built upon this foundation of e-celebrity, which will change on a dime. You know, do you honestly think that your Molyneux, your Milos, your McGuinnesses, do you think that they are going to stand by you, you know, if you are thrown in the gulag? They may stand behind one or two, like your Dankulas and stuff like that, who are picked up by the media, who get exposure. But do you think they care, really, ultimately, about you? They care about your money, but I don't think they care about who you are. I don't think they care about your identity beyond, you know, you being able to supply them with your Patreon shekels. I don't think they care about who you are in the way that the alt-right would care about who you are. But there's no strong foundation here. This is just a collection of e-celebrities, and I expect they are attempting to use this as a springboard for their in-real-life action. By that I mean that YouTube is dying for these people. For voices even like myself, it's the end, really. These are the dying days. Within a year's time, any sort of right-wing thought or anything that pushes the boundary even somewhat slightly is going to be off the site. It's going to be scrubbed off the internet, especially if net neutrality goes through the window, and we'll be left with milquetoast opinions that are even more milquetoast than the Sargons, the alt-Lite vision of the world. So we are expected, or we are counting down towards the end, and these people are counting to the end because they've built their careers. They've probably got mortgages, which are reliant on YouTube income, which are reliant on being internet personalities. And when it's built upon, again, another foundation that's shaky and tumultuous and something that has no real foundation in reality, then they have to try and translate what they've got now into the real world. And in your mind, and in their, like, then I'm sure when they're looking at their numbers, when they look at their, you know, hundreds of thousands of subs on YouTube, or they look at their Patreon money, and they look at all of this stuff, and they think in their minds that they're successful, that they have really become celebrities, for want of a better word. They go out into the real world and they see the actual people that will turn out for them are people who have been excluded from every other group in society, people who cannot make a difference in the world proper, so they have to go onto the internet to try and find a sense of belonging. When they actually look at that and they realise that they are surrounded by people whom they wouldn't associate or want associated with them, but they're trapped because that's how they're going to be making their money, that's when I think the real tragedy sets in. So it's very easy to look at people with big numbers on the internet and think that that translates into real life, but it doesn't. It really doesn't. If Kilroy didn't show you that, you know, Mundane Matt, who has like 200,000 subscribers, you know, and he can't even get a room of 8 people to turn out for him, then you've got to put it all in perspective. You know, it's all relative. It's all relative. And the people who are mobilizing the boots on the ground are the ones that these people have almost no respect for, are the ones that these people don't even want to acknowledge, because that would make their fragile egos disintegrate. Now I just want to move on to the sort of final movement of the video, the sort of reason why I wanted to make this, beyond just sort of pointing at this rally and going, isn't this going to be a disaster? What is the alt-right? What do they stand for? What's it all about? Well, I have to ask, you know, when they hear stuff like Make America Great Again and Brexit, and they latch onto these terms and they use them, these innately nationalist terms, and they use them, I have to ask, what are they hearing when they hear these things? What are they hearing when they hear Brexit? You know, what are they hearing when they hear Make America Great Again? What do they want? What do they actually want? When what they're comprised of are transsexuals, homosexuals, the same levels of degeneracy as the SJWs that they claim to oppose. In many cases, they are sort of a mirror version of the left. There's no moral decency to these people. They just want to fight for very abstract ideas which cannot not be implemented in reality. You can't have, for example, you can't have like freedom of speech or freedom of religion in a society which allows, you know, people who will stop and oppress freedom of speech, or people who will not allow freedom of religion. Let's say Muslims. You can't have a society which has like freedom of religion if you allow Islam within that society, because a key tenet of what they want, key point of their doctrine, is to convert those who aren't religious and who aren't Muslim into being Muslim. Anything less would deny them the right to practice as a true member of the Islamic faith. So you can't have these weird sunshine, everyone is happy ideals realistically in a society. You can't have... Look, when they say, oh, I want freedom of speech, I always ask, who for? And they go, oh, well, for everybody. Isn't that obvious? Isn't that the fairest way of doing things? And I was like, well, you know, who doesn't want freedom of speech for everybody? But that's an ideal that cannot be achieved. It's the same ideal as like world peace. These things cannot be achieved. Not with humanity, anyway. I mean, you can't have freedom of speech if you allow people to not want freedom of speech in your society. You can't have freedom of speech if you don't delineate it alongside who you are, your identity, groups. You know, you have to defend freedom of speech for those who want freedom of speech, or else if you allow everyone in, for example, if you allow those people who don't want freedom of speech in your society, which is built upon the idea of freedom of speech, then eventually those naysayers will take over and you won't have freedom of speech. You won't have this ideal that you're trying to propagate. It's not going to happen. So this, I mean, ultimately it's a civic nationalist way of thinking, and these sets of civic, like, nationalist ideals are built upon this idea where you can't really retain your identity upon joining. You know, you can't be a Muslim, you can't be a Christian if you join a civic nationalist society, because you won't really be able to practice in the way that you should, or the way that your doctrine determines. You know, you have to abide by this weird set of ideals. So the way you have to, you know, tally these abstract ideals of thought, like freedom of speech, like freedom of religion, is by pinning it to a group and trying to make it as much about the group's identity as about the abstract ideal. Another thing about the alt-right, and I think it pertains especially to the liberalists, is that they think in terms of the alt-right as it just being completely evil and non-negotiable, and they shouldn't even consider the idea of evolving into true nationalist sentiment, because that would just be completely the other side of what they want to fight, and the horseshoe is great, and all of this nonsense. And so they reject the offer from the alt-right to come aboard, and they reject that out of this need to placate a politically correct sensibility, parroting these milquetoast positions that won't afford them any sort of protection from the mainstream media, from these people on the left, from Antifa, from just the consensus at the moment. It doesn't afford them any protection by espousing these milquetoast positions like, oh, freedom of speech, stuff like that, because they see you anyway as a full-blown 1488er. You know, but at least you've got, oh, I'm not a racist. At least you can comfort yourself with that. But you're still going to be in the same box. And you're still going to have your life ruined, your reputation destroyed and in tatters, by espousing sentiments that the mass, the sort of brainwashed mass, will see as being grouped with the evil Nazis. That's just what's going to happen. And the sooner you realise this, the better. The alt-right is a lie. It's a literal smoke and mirrors con job, a fantasy. And the real sentiment, the real substance, the real core of the matter lies, in all honesty, more with the alt-right than it does with the alt-light.